It's wonderful to be here this morning to see old faces, old friends. Um, well, we're probably not that old friends. I haven't been gone that long, but it's good to be here with the CCS team as well as with SEC at this year's CAM meeting. Balancing your emotions. Emotions obviously are very important aspects of who we are. And although many a time something that perhaps we don't take time to appreciate and to find ways that we can manage our emotions better, more effectively, so we can also have better, healthier relationships with ourselves, but also with those around us. So mental health and ethnic minorities is what we are looking at today. And just to kick off, as far as introduction is concerned, I just like to establish the point that mental health is a global problem. Although the theme is looking at mental health and ethnic minorities, it is a global problem, which means regardless of what background you're coming from, mental health is something that is experienced everywhere. In fact, with a recent figures that came out from the World Health Organization only a few years ago, was talking about, for example, common mental health disorders like depression affecting about 300 million people worldwide. It is not an issue that is exclusive to a particular race or gender of people, but it's something that affects people everywhere. So then I guess the question will still be why focusing on mental health and ethnic minorities? Um, I guess this it has become an important a subject or something that the team decided is useful to maybe speak about today because despite this being a global problem, what we also see is that there is such a high, especially here in the UK, maybe elsewhere, there is such a high disparity when it comes to accessibility to mental health services, but also clinical outcomes in terms of when you do compare the BAME communities within the UK compared to our white counterparts or white population. And the question then becomes, why would that be the case? Considering that the services out there are supposed to provide support for all people, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, whether rich or poor, whatever. Yet we find that outcomes, accessibilities are so different for the different the comparison between white counterparts compared to ethnic people from ethnic minority backgrounds. And so these are some of the things that we would want to explore this morning to try and establish why that might be the case. And also, is there something we can do, or those of us from BAME communities, is there something we can do to enhance, to improve, um, well, what the current figures may suggest? So I just want to share very briefly um, some excerpts from some of the current figures out there in relation to mental health issues in the UK and where the BAME communities fare when it comes to accessibility and treatment. So if we take the Black population in the UK to start with, um, the APMS, the Adult Psychiatric Mobility Survey that was done recently, suggests that Black men were more likely than their white counterparts to experience a psychotic disorder in a year. And then the next point also highlights the fact that the risk of psychosis in Black Caribbean groups is estimated to be nearly 7 times higher than in white population. Now, this is quite alarming because, again, going back to my original point, um, we all supposed to have access, equal access to psychiatric services, here in the UK. We're all supposed to have the same support. And yet we find that, for example, in psychosis, Black Caribbean group or people from that community may experience this 7 times higher. To me, that is way, way disproportionate. Perhaps in terms of perhaps how things ought to be. Why would it be that for a particular group they will struggle with this 7 times more than the white population? And then the next point also highlights that detention rates, for example, on the Mental Health Act in 2017-18 found that there were 4 times higher for people in the Black or Black British group than, again, those in the white group. So there seems to be a theme developing that in all these areas, as you look at, in terms of some severe mental health disorders, Black population are faring worse. In terms of detention, of course, when mental health issues get that severe, and in some cases people can't uh, be in a position to have capacity to make decisions, sectioning that comes in, and so this Mental Health Act may be applied. And even in those cases where this is the situation, what we're finding is that Black people are much worse in this area, again, compared to their white counterparts. And then we also told that Black men were reported, of course, to have the highest rates of drug use and drug dependency, again, than other groups. And if you take the stresses of this life and everything that is going on out there, why would it be that Black people, for example, have the highest rates of drug use and drug dependency? Generally speaking, we know that sometimes when people have to depend on drugs, it's usually because they might be using it to numb a pain. And the question would be, what is this pain and why would it be different for people from within this particular ethnic group? Another alarming statistic here is that whilst the white Caucasian population experienced the highest rates of suicidal thoughts, suicidal rates are higher among young Black men or young men of Black African, Black Caribbean origin, and among middle-aged Black African, Black Caribbean, and South Asian women than among their white British counterparts. So to me, this may just be a case that when we talk about, going back to accessibility, how many people are actually going to GP seeking help, perhaps the white population does more of that maybe than our our Black and Asian population. And so whilst there may be a record of more reports of suicidal ideation in terms of rates, so maybe success of suicide, we may find that, again, maybe much higher in Black population and Asian population compared to white population, according to this study. So again, the APMS found no meaningful differences between Asian people and their white counterparts in terms of experiencing psychotic disorders or common mental health problems. Then you also have, there were less, sorry, just trying to move a few bits of my screen around. There were less, yeah, all right. So suicidal thoughts were less common, according to this, in Asian people than white British people, as was the likelihood of self-harming behavior. Those identifying as Asian or Asian British are 1/3 less likely to be in contact with mental health or learning disability services. Again, I guess the question this throws out is that we know when it comes to issues around mental health, it affects everyone. But why is it that there is less contact with mental health services when you consider the Asian population or the Black population, again, compared to the white population. So I guess as you begin to ponder, to reflect on these figures, there's got to be thoughts around what may be the underlying reasons. There's got to be some reasons why we all may be suffering with these problems, and yet some people find it more easier, maybe more comfortable to actually go and speak about these things and get support, whereas others struggling with the same problems, yet find it difficult to be able to access support from within the services out there. If we kind of shift and look at a little bit more um, on the Asian British side of things, you also find that we told here in England, the South Asian community in England and Wales, research indicates that more specifically, older South Asian women seem to be at higher risk group of suicide. Um, the other thing here also is the fact that in 2018 there was a review found that non-European immigrant women, including young South Asian women, were at a higher risk group for suicide attempts. So here is a case where this group, for example, may not be accessing support, and yet maybe at a higher risk group of suicide, again, confirming the fact that mental health issues is across the board. In 2018, again, a review that was done found that, well, Chinese people, interestingly, are underrepresented in mental health services. Rates of admission to mental health inpatient facilities in England and Wales were lower among Chinese population compared to national average. What is interesting, and this is my personal experience, which I believe to a large degree perhaps confirms a lot of what these figures may be suggesting, that having been working, as a contractor here in the UK in mental health, well, rightly or wrongly, whether good or bad, I've had a chance of working in so many different geographical locations in the UK, from Lincolnshire to Bristol, to Dorset, to Bedfordshire, to Berkshire, to Hampshire, and even London, and in pretty much all my experiences, having worked in certain areas that arguably are very highly mixed population, I can almost, having treated hundreds of patients, I can almost count, on top of my head, how many people I've seen from the Black community, from perhaps the Asian community. And in particular, I can't even recall seeing maybe more than two Chinese people from, yeah, people from the Chinese community in mental health services. The Black population I've seen, probably that I have seen and worked with in this NHS services, will not be up to 10 or more than 10. This last year, perhaps I saw a little bit more of an increase in the Asian population in a particular area I was working at, specifically from Indian and Pakistani backgrounds or communities, but largely across all these various areas that I've worked at. Hardly have I mean, the number of people from these communities that have been seeking support is very minimal. And so that still raises the question, why is that the case? There are a few possible factors, influential risk factors that perhaps contributes to the mental health issues that we might face, or people from within these communities might face when it comes to accessing support or getting the right support within the communities. One of the first things is issue around racism and discrimination. Now, a lot of these things I'm sure you would have heard in the news. in terms of, how perhaps either Black or Asian people may struggle with support from within the community. Part of this may be just the negative experiences that some of these people do experience when they even try to get support. There is a growing body of research suggesting that those exposed to racism, usually generally in the community, are more likely to experience some mental health problems, such as psychosis and or depression. You may you may wonder why. I mean, a very basic explanation of some of these could be that, of course, as people, being able to go around your daily duties, managing day-to-day affairs, being in control of what you manage, what you deal with, what you can find as a way of supporting yourself, your family. All these are basic human needs. But if a person finds themselves in a position where even having access to some of these basic things on a continuous basis is a problem, one, it increases, that person's stress levels. And of course, we know how dangerous stress can be. Stress doesn't only have an impact on our physical well-being, but mentally, stress can play a risk factor. It can be a risk factor for various mental health issues, as well as a maintenance factor. So those who experience racism and discrimination, which is something that people from within these communities tend to experience, then the outcome is that it can have effects on their mental health or emotional health and well-being. Another risk factor or influential factor here is social and economic inequalities. There are a few figures here suggesting, for example, when it comes to unemployment rates are highest for people from within Black background, about 26%, from a Pakistani or Bangladeshi background, about 23%, compared to, again, the white counterparts, which is 11%. So when you look at that, and then you take other socioeconomic inequality factors like homelessness, which is also a key factor among minority groups within the UK, all these, and most of us probably would be aware, those who have had a chance of working with people, homeless people, or people who are homeless, and sometimes maybe seeking shelter. Those of you who have had a chance of working at the Advent Center and stuff like that, most of them do not only struggle with these issues around socio-economic inequalities, such as homelessness or unemployment, but a lot of them also struggle with issues around mental health. It's important to note, again, that these factors usually may serve as risk factors for mental health problems. The other one is stigma. We know stigma generally is a problem that, as a society, society as a whole, we are all working to overcome the problem of stigma, but it's still something that is out there. And within, again, the BAME communities, problem of stigma even seems to be much bigger and much more sort of severe issue. A lot of the time, I guess, the way that these problems are being perceived within these communities means that most people from BAME communities find it difficult to be able to be open about these issues and therefore be able to seek openly and actively seek support for mental health problems. Other possible risk factors in this case may also include things like, problems from within the community. So on the one hand, we have problems of the system that seems to make mental health problems a prevalent issue amongst ethnic minority groups. But apart from the systemic problems that we face, there are also specific or maybe particular problems that may be unique to some of these communities that also contributes to the mental health issues that we face. So one of them is the word there is it's intergenerational traumas, not intergeneral traumas, intergenerational traumas. And the problem with intergenerational traumas is that most of us, and I'm not going to say much about it because I know Dr. Les is presenting on this and has a fantastic presentation on this. And so whatever it is you're doing tomorrow and wherever you are, make yourself available for that hour to listen to Dr. Les Aki on this particular issue here, intergenerational traumas. Many of us, when we look at our parents, our grandparents, there were practices, there were things that used to happen that were either a taboo to talk about or somehow we accepted them to be a norm. And it wasn't spoken about because something that happened. But years down the line, what we find is that when those problems weren't dealt with, so great grandparents didn't really talk about it, wasn't addressed. Grandparents didn't talk about it, wasn't addressed. Our parents didn't talk about it, wasn't addressed. So you find that generation after generation after generation, there are these traumas that continue as a cycle within our communities. And I guess another thing to mention here as well is that when people have experienced trauma, one thing that is very common, a symptom that follows any traumatic experiences tends to be anxiety at very high levels. Because when the person has experienced an event that really shatters everything they know in their world, it creates a sense of threat, of fear, that people then function constantly. Some people becoming super vigilant around them, constantly scanning, looking around for threats, just so they can keep themselves safe. And the other thing we know about anxiety disorders is that most of these can't be learned behaviors. So if traumas have happened over time and the survivors have lived through that through the lenses of being constantly fearful, worrying, being anxious, you find the generations after us in so many different ways would learn to think and believe that because the world out there is so unsafe, most people will be living through fear and constant threat. So intergenerational traumas that have not really been dealt with, you find it carries on within the family line, within the generations, and we continue to suffer. And most of us, our mental health issues of today may be because of past traumas that really have not been dealt with. The other thing that may also be quite unique to some of us in our communities, even today, is the extended family systems. Now, don't get me completely wrong, because there are some great benefits in having extended family systems. The support that parents may enjoy from grandparents or whatever, all these can be highly beneficial. But by the same token, they also come with their own problems. A lot of research out there suggests that a lot of abuses that happen, especially in the area of perhaps sexual abuse and things like that, usually happen by people, perpetrators tend to be people who are known within the family circles. If I, look back at history, growing up as a young person from a community that is kind of very much, ethnic minority community, I remember things that were done sometimes from some unshameful parents to their own children, and yet will feel comfortable to talk about it as if it was okay to do that. But these things would happen because of sometimes systems that we have in place. Another one that sometimes is quite alarming, that even here in the UK in the 21st century, I still hear people talk about, oh, my children, or my child, or this particular child of mine is being so disobedient and so challenging that I think the best thing is to send this child back home so that they will learn proper discipline, and then they will come and they'll be all changed and different people. To a large degree, well, in some cases, this might work, but in a lot of cases, it doesn't work. And sometimes this ends up actually creating more problems, not just for that young person, but ultimately for the family at large. Just very quickly, an example of a case that a young person I was working with, well, not so young, she's now quite an adult, a mother of two children in late 20s. When she was a teenager, her family decided that out of all the children, she was the expression black sheep. You know, she was a difficult child. And so parents decided, well, we will ship her back to Africa to an uncle so that, you know, the uncle will have time to show her, you know, proper discipline. And if she doesn't have access to all the resources she has in the UK, she will learn to appreciate life and to behave much more properly or appropriately. The young person told her story. When she was back there, a lot of the money that her parents sent back there for her upkeep, their uncle spent the money. Hardly did she actually ever see some of this money that was sent for her benefit. But not only that, it got to a point where the uncle decided that he was now going to use her as the person to relieve or to manage his sexual needs. In other words, sexually abused this young girl. In the course of time, this young girl then became really ill, and so then she has to be, they had to fly her back to the UK for treatment. And sometime after that, in fact, some years after that, that was when she gathered courage to tell her father what had happened. The father completely broke down. I mean, he could not imagine in his world that his own brother could have done something like that to his daughter. So this became a problem, as in the father then went through a phase of feeling guilty, depressed, low mood, tearful, mother super angry about everything that happened to this young girl. This young girl also then went through a phase where she had to deal with anxiety, panic attacks, and of course the trauma, PTSD of what she went through. The initial rationale for this behavior, I guess the intention to the parents was a right intention, but the outcome was a devastating one for the family. So, of course, like I said before, extended family systems may have their benefits, but sometimes a lot of the abuses that happens to our young people is because we may leave home, travel abroad, we leave the children with extended family members to take care of them with a view that in a few years later, when we are settled, we would go and then bring those children, back with us. Or sometimes we even have the children here, and when they are young, because they deprive us or they make it difficult for us to have the appropriate childcare, but also to work and make the money, we choose to send the children back home. And by doing that, sometimes the danger is that we miss out on the crucial bonding time that parent and child should have. And later on, when those children rejoin, you find that there are issues of attachment, there are behavioral difficulties, because sometimes those same children never feel they belong in the family circles. And of course, a sense of belonging is one of the very basic needs of every child. Mental health issues then becomes the outcome. Another issue that results, another possible risk factor that exists within our communities is also this level of stress that many of us are placing on us because of dual responsibilities that we may have. What I mean by that is that some of us are here, we have a family we're managing here, but also we have a high responsibility for people that may be back home, wherever they are. This may be in Africa, this may be in Caribbean, this may be in Asia, this may be in Latin America. One young person again that, for example, I'm working with at the moment from Asia, and I won't mention the country's name. If I was to tell you the pressure that this young lady is going through, being the only one supporting her family back home, and yet the treatment that she's getting when she can't send money back home, it's really just unbelievable. Sometimes I get really just gobsmacked listening to her and what she's going through. There are, of course, times that we know we have family back home that we need to support, because without the support, most of them probably would go without or would have nothing. But we need to be mindful of the level of stress we might take on board, because all those stresses can be a risk factor for various mental health issues that we face as people of minority backgrounds here in the UK. Another factor, very quickly, is also, again, various cultural practices that we may have, some of which, again, are born from perhaps a place of care. Um, but what we also know that within the same, what might seem as care, is that sometimes we do these things to actually protect, or we believe protects, the family image, rather than thinking about the real care of maybe the young person who may be involved. And so things like pressure, excessive pressure on our young people, when we think they get of age and they need to get married. Of course, marriage is a blessing, it's a great thing, but we ought to be mindful to what extent we take in this pressure that we place on our young people. Another issue is also in some of our BAME communities, things like forced marriages that still happens. And when you speak to some of the young people from some of these communities and what they went through, the deceit that parents will put them through, for example, oh, we're going on holiday. And then the next thing they know, they are in this place, they've been married off to somebody they've never met or never known, and then expected to be left within that culture and be an amazing wife in these cultures. Um, there are a lot of trauma sometimes that goes with that, and a lot of other mental health problems that also go to that. So again, recapping this sort of influential risk factors for the mental health issues that most people from these communities do experience. There are, of course, the systemic issues we face, like race and gender, like culture, like social and socioeconomic inequalities. All these problems do contribute to people struggling with mental health from these communities. But also, there are internal cultural factors that also applies or makes some of us more susceptible to experiencing mental health issues. So knowing that we all struggle with this, why is it that we still find it so difficult to then access support? One of the first points here is that, one, we don't trust the services. And somebody might say, well, rightly so. If you look at, the historical context, the socio-economic situations, the inequalities that happen, and perhaps some past, researches when it comes to even things like people being treated in hospitals, people will think, well, I can't trust them. In fact, what is interesting, even during this COVID era, right? And when it comes to issues around mask wearing, taking at the job or whatever. And I'm not here to promote job taking or anything like that. But generally speaking, what we see is that, or at least what we're told, is that a lot of people from some of these communities are highly reluctant. A big part of that is that there is lack of trust within services. And as I said, people may feel their reasons are justified because time and time again, they have been given reasons not to be able to trust the system. Another barrier, another reason why we may struggle to access support might be, and I need to, I'm checking the time here, I need to be wrapping up quickly, so bear with me for a few more slides and we'll be done. Another reason might be fear of being judged or being misunderstood. Sometimes the issue here might be that, oh, that therapist wouldn't understand me, or that GP doesn't understand me, and they seem to even judge me before they make time to listen to what I've come here for. Another issue is that yes, there may be services, but sometimes it appears these services don't necessarily take into account the specific cultural needs of these communities. Then there is stigma that we spoke about earlier, suspicion of the system and process, and of course, language barriers. I must say that at least a lot of the NHS services I've worked in most cases, they do try. A lot of them do have services of interpreters, within their provision of services. So if somebody came from a particular background and language was a problem, usually there is scope to hire an interpreter from that particular culture or ethnicity to be able to help facilitate the process of treatment much more effectively. And so even though, on the face of it, we may feel justified, or sometimes people may feel justified from within these communities not to engage with the services, what we find is that when you take mental health being an issue that affects all people, yet the comparison of those who would readily go and speak to a GP and get support as compared to those from BAME communities who may be reluctant or may not seek support, the outcome is that one group ends up having better outcomes, more support, and perhaps address their problems more, whereas on the other, some of us maybe from these communities, by not engaging, by not seeking support, means that there may be no support, more mental health problems, which in some cases may result in things like sectioning under the Mental Health Act. And so a quick vicious cycle then that is created is that if you take the BAME communities, there are all the risk factors that we spoke about, some of which may apply in other cultures, but for our specific communities, there are all those risk factors externally and also internally. And that means mental health problems do result. Of course, that then leads to some of the barriers that we've just spoken about, which will lead to less engagement with services, and in some cases, the worsening of problems because supports are not being sought. And finally, that affects our mental and our emotional well-being. And we may lack the emotional balance that we need to be able to function in the way that we ought to. So with all of that, what do we do with it? The system on the face of it doesn't favor people from within these communities. But we know the problem isn't just the system. Within our own systems, there are issues that still contribute to mental health problems. And so I'm saying, and I believe that the purpose of these theme, balancing our emotions, is to break the cycle so we can become more healthier emotionally and mentally balanced people. Generations gone may not have done it, but it may be our time to take the mantle to break the cycle. So the later generations do not carry on with the way the past generations might have addressed the problem. We are here in 21st century. There is support out there. It may not always fully, provide what we might need, but at the moment, there are services out there who are actively looking at ways to provide culturally more sensitive support to people from within the various ethnic minority communities. How do we do this? I would say encourage the conversations on mental health that has already started. As a country here in the UK, we are in a place now compared to 10, 15 years ago, where mental health is spoken about almost every day, everywhere you look. And by constant communication, what we're noticing is that people who would have never spoken about this are now talking about it. And because of that, there is an element of normalization with it, which is making it easier for some people to come out and seek support. These conversations, I believe, in our ethnic minority communities have begun. Cornerstone, if we take the church, for example, in particular, I know Cornerstone has been doing a lot of work over this last few years to increase awareness and to encourage the conversation within our congregations. But they don't need to just stop with our churches. We need to talk about these issues at home. create an atmosphere at home where our young people would feel comfortable that they can raise these issues that they may be struggling with. Encourage those who may be struggling to actively seek support, and let the education on mental health issues continue within our communities. I just listed just about 4 organizations here that are actively trying to provide services that may meet the needs of various communities here in the UK. So, of course, our very own CCS, I'm sure they cater actually for a number of languages from within the team. But beyond that, I'm sure they try to specifically take into account things like culture, ethnicity, spirituality, all these things that other people or sometimes other services might not be able to do. There is Rethink Mental Illness, another charity in the UK. And of course, various NHS services, they do the very best. And in most cases, actually, some of the services you may have is more or less the same as you would have from any other therapist anywhere. And of course, Mind UK is another one. Um, the that is pretty much brings me to the end of the slides. But I think one thing that we can take, from here as Christians, as perhaps people from various ethnic minority backgrounds, when it comes to our mental, emotional balance or well-being, I like to believe that one of the things God desires for all of us is to be well-rounded, emotionally balanced individuals. He says in John 10:10, the thief comes but to steal and to destroy, but I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And when we, for some reason, do not actively seek the support we ought to seek in order to enhance our emotional well-being, the question is, we leave ourselves, we leave our families in situations whereby not addressing these issues, we end up hurting each other in ways that are not really necessary. And as I always say, if one individual can become more emotionally balanced, that means you have a family, possible family, that might be a more emotionally balanced family. And by extension, what we have is then a more emotionally balanced church. And I pray that this will be our experience, that if we need to get help, that perhaps we need to take the proactive approach to do so. If we know people that may be struggling, we might be the ones to encourage them to be able to do so. And as we know, we all to carry one another's burdens, let's be there for each other so we can support each other in the right way. God bless you. I think we have a few minutes for questions or comments. So if anyone has anything you want to raise, maybe an experience to share, anything that might encourage someone, please use this next few moments to raise your questions. There is a panel of expert counselors here who, if I need to throw the questions to them, I'm more than happy to do so. Thank you very much.
Are you struggling to cope with life? Conflict, bereavement, fear, relationship, anger, depression, negative thoughts, trauma, and uncertainty can all cause emotional imbalance. Don't struggle alone. CCS, your trusted confidential counselling service, is here for you. Call our listening line on 03301 332 945. Our office line for appointments on 020 7723 8050, or visit our website www.ccscounselling.org.uk. Our counsellors speak various languages. CCS, a shoulder to lean on. We are here to listen.
Thank you. I can see there is a hand up. Ada?
Good morning. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Just a couple things. I don't know if they're questions or comments or mixture. So obviously being part of the BAME community and being in healthcare, what you said is really true. And I don't know how we can actually, because people look up to those of us who are in the healthcare. They kind of, if they show up at a place or whatever, they want to come to you, even though you might not be the one who could help them. So I think there's a bit of weight on us as individuals who are already in the system to kind of promote, but it's very difficult because, like you said, there's so much culture mixed in and so many compounding factors that are just making it complicated. So I just wanted to know, I have experienced, for me, what has been most difficult is where we come from, not just culturally as Africans, specifically I'm speaking about, but as Adventists. I feel like as Adventists, we have created an even greater barrier for ourselves. My own personal experience when my mother died, it's been 11 years now. And I remember a few months later, I'm still very tearful in church. And the women who surrounded me were like, no, 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 don't cry. There's hope. Don't cry. Don't cry. I mean, how can you tell Ada not to cry? I cry even when I'm happy. I mean, how do you start telling me not to cry? So don't cry. And then I mentioned to a couple of them how my GP had given me citalopram, antidepressant. I'm like, no, 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 no. We'll pray for you. So I asked a genuine question. You're praying for me. So I leave church, I go home. I'm tearful all day. I can't move, I can't think, I can't do this, but you're praying for me. None of you have even shown up at my door. None of you have even, do you know how I'm gonna eat? But it's and then another thing, another area which I've had a lot of friends go through is divorce in the Adventist church. And that is causing so much mental illness in our church that I don't even know why we don't talk about it. I don't know if Adventists feel like if we don't talk about it, and one person told me there's no divorce in heaven. So basically, if you're divorced, you're going to hell. You're definitely not going to heaven. In the church. I'm not making this up, by the way. So I just want to know, how do we then support people when we ourselves are contradicting ourselves? We have a discourse in our heads of how to even, and some of us people look up to in whatever situation. So how are you going to support them? And finally, my heart breaks because I have a 20-year-old son. And a month ago, one of his schoolmates, year 2 engineering student, jumped into a river. From the name, it looks like he was a Nigerian, but parents live here and everything. And I'm just thinking, are we doing anything in our universities, especially for our young people? Because at the moment they're studying under a situation where we would never even imagine. So they're out there, they're renting these houses, there's just them. Maybe some have girlfriends, some don't. And then there are no parents, there are no teachers, because at least when you're attending, you have teachers. And so I'm just wondering, so I know I've talked too much and I've probably confused everything, but those are just the kind of things I want to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. I think you have raised some really important points here, and I'll try and touch on it. And as I said, my colleagues are there. If you guys pick up on any of those and you want to comment, that would be brilliant. But I guess first things first. First question about how we encourage, those around us when we ourselves seem to be having a contradictory views, perhaps about what these issues are to start with. I like to think that maybe the way to approach this is, first of all, we need to be able to educate ourselves. Because if we do not understand, we've all been socialized to perceive mental health in a particular way. And unless those perceptions are changed, and can only be changed through continual education, then we would continue to have this struggle. So just like the example you gave, there are those that would demonize medication full stop. And yet we know that there are times where, in as much as we don't encourage people to stay on some of these medications in the long term, there are times that daily functioning may be so difficult that somebody just needs that medication to be able to kickstart life, and for them to be able to get to a point where maybe they can almost come to a restoration of perhaps who they used to be before. So education, 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 I think, is the key to dispel and to break some of the stigma, some of the concepts or the perceptions that we have about this issue. If we embrace it because we understand it, then we're more likely to encourage someone who is also struggling. If I don't believe in it, then there's no way I'm going to, bother myself wanting to support someone. A very sad story, I had some time ago, I was working with a 16-year-old boy who was doing everything he could to deal with his issues around depression and anxiety. And as a minor, you would normally expect that parents would be supportive. And all he wanted was even for his mother to say, yes, I can see, son, you're struggling. But his mother was like, I don't believe in it. And therefore, there is nothing you're going to say that I think I should even waste my time to support you. So the key issue is we need to understand our concept needs to change. We need to understand the factors that creates mental health problem. All of us can be affected by them. You talked about loss. It's one of them. Stresses, sometimes extreme stress levels. There are so many factors that affect all of us because we are human. And for that reason, we can all fall into this category. But if we continue to educate ourselves, it really helps in the way we provide support as well. The specific question about what we do in our universities, I think is a very interesting one. And I know for a fact, that a lot of our young people struggles sometimes do come when they go to uni. And generally speaking, we know universities nowadays, in fact, universities in all schools do tend to try to have a counselor or a therapist on site. But as a church, as a people, I think that's a question that maybe should go to Tembi or Cornerstone, because I'm not sure what plans they might have for young people who are in universities. But I think it's a very, very vital point for us to think about as a people, because the young people definitely do need that additional support when they're out. I'm sure, I don't know whether there is anything else my other colleagues want to mention on that.
The teens department have actually started a university program that they do with young people. So it might be a good idea to contact the teens department. And then on the very important topic of education. At Cornerstone, we have piloted a scheme where we are wanting all our pastors and our directors at the SEC to actually train in mental health first aid. It is an amazing program. I noticed Cicely has put a message in there about it. And thankfully, our president, Pastor Osei, has made it mandatory for all pastors to do this training. And also for each church, we are planning, and some churches have already done it. We are planning to make sure each church has got 1 or 2 mental health first aiders. And this is a way of actually dealing with the stigma. If it's being preached from the pulpit, if the pastor actually understands what is mental health and what they can do in different situations, I think we are in the right direction. Cicely, I don't know whether you want to add on anything there. Cicely is one of our mental health first aid trainers.
Yes, I can add on the point you have emphasized on there that especially for the youth, thank you, Anta, for mentioning the university students, because the youth part of it emphasizes on the need to normalize those conversations. And just as you talk about a headache or a backache, it equips them and gives them that confidence to do so. But if it starts from our households, our neighborhoods, and then our churches, then we'll be closer to reducing the stigma and discrimination that comes with it. And more so, really that goes to our services to address the issue of a representation of our communities in them.
And just for Ada, If you go to our website, you can listen to the presentation that was done on grief on Monday. I'm not sure if you were here or not. I hope that will be helpful for you.
Oh, thank you for that. I missed it because I couldn't log on. We had the wrong, it said 992 instead of 922. So today is the first day I've logged on, and that one I really wanted to hear. So thank you. I will go to the website.
There is a hand up. Okay, I'll take
Lucy.
Mona and then I'll come to Sister Lucy.
Lucy's hand was up.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I just wanted to take up on the issue of training for pastors and the availability of mental health counselors in the local church. Now that's the formalized program. But what my concern from observation and experience is that we have a formal structure in place, but the average member is isolated because accessing help from the formal structure is not the easiest thing. So my question is, when we have mental health counselors at the church, are they, and the pastor, are they going to be approachable, accessible, trained in people's skills to listen, to understand, to be helpful, and to be trustworthy? Because sometimes we have resources, but the members who need those resources are not confident that their issue would stay at home. And I'm not talking out of turn, I'm talking from experience. So when we have the resources, are the personnel trained to listen? Are they going to be listening with their inner ear, or are they going to be waiting to be contacted? What is the protocol that we're going to be using to ensure that the members who need these services can feel confident to access these services and to receive help?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I think this probably is one for Tembi.
Muted. Okay. Thank you for that very vital question. It's a very important point you've brought up. One of the main reasons why we actually started with the pastors, we had realized that the pastors actually probably don't understand much. And I'm saying it in a nice, respectful way. They don't understand much about mental health, or maybe they are putting it at the back of their agenda, not being aware that it's actually at the forefront if they are to reach their parishioners and actually help with openness to the gospel. So if they understand in the training, they are taught to listen, as you are saying, they are taught to recognize signs, they are taught so much more. And we pray that they will be able to understand. The few that have given me feedback were saying, wow, we needed this. Where was it all along? We now understand where we have been going wrong. So with those comments, we hope we'll see a change. And also, you don't have to access the services through the pastor. You can come directly to Cornerstone. We have our own website. We also have a listening line where you can actually call in every day from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you can speak to a trained listener, and you can contact the office for counseling. You don't have to go through anybody. You can come directly to Cornerstone or access any other counseling organizations.
You still hearing me? I understand what you're saying.
Right.
I'll tell you from personal experience. I am a divorcee, and I have a daughter who has a mental health issue. Okay. And
yes,
this has been going on for years, and we've never had any help from the church. Okay, so I'm not talking on my issue because I'm quite capable of getting help outside, which is where I get help. But another person in church lost her daughter, and as I think it's Ada was talking about, she was distraught. I'm talking about heavily distraught. But that person, there was a counselor at the church, and the pastor was also a trained counselor, but she received no help from them. So when I talk about accessibility, I'm not talking about accessing through the pastor. I'm talking about listening with the inner ear, so that the counselors are aware, but more than aware, they sensitize that we are part of the church. Our skills and abilities are for the building up of the church. So if there's a bereavement, or if there's sickness or mental illness or whatever, I cannot wait to be contacted. I will make the first move. So accessibility is not just from the needy to the provider, but also from the provider to the needy. Is that making sense?
Yes.
So it's about
Thank you for that.
sensitizing the resource.
Very good point. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I now take Sister Lucy?
Oh, thank you very much, Brother Emmanuel. Thanks for your presentation. In fact, you are doing a great job, Cornerstone people. Thank you for the awareness. Creating awareness is very important. As Christians, even if someone is going through emotional stress, we think it's because of sin he has committed or something. So people are afraid and shy even to come out. But all this presentation and your program is helping others. We can pray for them as Christians, but they still need to seek professional help. Whilst they are seeking professional help, then we too are praying for them. So creating awareness is very important. Sometimes, you know, the people, when they are going through that emotional stress, they don't have insight to it at all. So it's good that you have this program and you have this in place to help people. God bless you. Amen.
Thank you, sister.
There's a question from Jenny. I was just saying there's a question from Jenny, and she says mental health issues is traumatic for family members as much as it is for individuals experiencing it. Are there services targeted to support family members?
Okay, I would try to answer that, but I think that again, if Tembi can also come in on this one, that would be good. What I do know from some services is that, of course, when a member is struggling, not all the services might have this in place, but there are cases where, for example, some services may run other support, specific support groups for family members who may be supporting the individual that is struggling. But sadly, I think in my experience, this might not be perhaps the most common practice that you would find with a lot of services. But having said that, some of the services would have something in place for those who are looking after someone with mental health services. If we come back to our specific cornerstone, I would call on Tembi here to help us.
Okay. That is an area we still need to grow. What we have at the moment is the listening line, where people can call in and get support for whatever is going on, including needing support for caring for somebody. I don't know if anybody in the team has got something to say on that. Okay.
Okay. Hopefully that question is answered, unless somebody else wants to comment on that. Okay, do we have any more questions? Otherwise, I think we are 11 minutes over our time.
Can I just add something to that last question? Sorry, this is Edith. You may not be able to see me. Yeah. So if you are if you have a family member that is already part of a service, mental health service, you can ask for assistance. I know where I work, we do care assessments for carers that are carried out by support workers, and basically to look at what your needs may be physically, materially as well, because sometimes you need other support in terms of housing and so on, and also what psychological support you might need. So somebody would carry out that assessment and then incorporate it into the care of the person that's being treated in the service. So you can, if that hasn't been availed to you, you can actually ask. You can ask that they do a care. And in most cases, almost, I know that many of our clients, we do that because we take into recognition that the fact that the illness is not just for the person, that the environment as well is impacted. That includes the social environment. So you can make a request for that in the service that you are part of.
All right, I think I'll hand over back to Zembia Hannah. Wrap up.
Are there any more questions in the chat, Hannah?
No more questions. It's just people wanting to find out if CCS are Christians or it's just SDAs. I think we've answered that in the chat, but I just thought I'd bring it.
Yes, I answered that in the chat. We are currently all Seventh-day Adventist counselors in our team. We, however, time and again do get some Christian, non-Adventist Christians who join us, and we welcome them. All right. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And we're going to ask you to close for us with a word of prayer.
Hey, shall we bow our heads wherever you are and pray? Father, once again, we are grateful for the opportunity of education. Hopefully with the view that this would help us as individuals to make the changes we need to make in our lives, or even to encourage others around us who may also be struggling one way or the other. Lord, we pray for every individual who logged onto this program today, and even those who couldn't, that if anybody is in a place right now truly struggling and can't seem to find their way around, pray, Father, that you would be with that individual, that you would encourage them wherever they are in their journey, that you would help them to see open doors, that they would have the courage, perhaps for the first time, to admit of the struggles they have and therefore seek the support they need to seek. Sometimes we talk about these things, and as therapists or as anybody on the platform, we may truly never know what people are going through, yet you know all things. And so we pray, Lord, that if there is anyone who might have even reached the point of complete hopelessness, that because of you and through you and in you, that individual may find hope. And rather than giving up, they would rather, with your strength, go forward and get the help that is needed to become well, so we all can enjoy the abundant life that you desire for us. And this is our prayer this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.